learning how to swim by first entering the deep end of the pond. So I've been given 15 minutes to talk about something which is pretty advanced in Snomed City terms also, and that is how do the people who make EMRs design it so that it fits nicely with the EMR. So I'm rather hoping that you do understand the basics of Snomed City, because in 15 minutes there is no way I can cover it. But still, I'm going to have 3 or 4 introductory slides for those who do not know what Snomed City is about. So just a quick summary of Snomed City features. So Snomed City uses the concept of clinical ideas. So each clinical idea has got a discrete code. But if you see number 4 to 7, which is in red, they're all the same clinical idea. Although they have different wordings, different synonyms, Snomed City supports synonyms, but gives them the same clinical, concept ID, the same ID behind it. So the doctor can really use any of these. And that is the power of Snomed City. So we know within the same code, we have something like a technical correct term. We have something that the patient may be using in everyday talk to the doctor or maybe on their own blog. We have alternate terms that can be used. Multiple alternate terms is just one example. We can have abbreviations also. So even if the doctor types MI, he will be able to find. And the correct concept will be stored. So briefly, there is one concept ID, which is the main ID of Snomed, and it is attached to multiple descriptive terms. Here there are 7, they can be more, they can be less. And all of them are graded as which is the preferred term, which is an acceptable term. And depending upon the language that country uses, you put in a language pack that will filter out the terms and show the terms that are appropriate for the language. So maybe US English is different, UK English is different, appendectomy. In Sweden, it may be a different terminology. So essentially, if I write something in English and quote it as Snomed City, and the patient goes to Sweden, what comes out is basically their language. So there is a sort of translator inbuilt also in this. But what I'm going to cover in this talk is not the basic principles at all, which can be a half-day talk. I'm just going to talk about how do we incorporate Snomed City into the hospital's EMR. Truly, this is actually for the programmers, for the designers. But why a lot of you are doctors, a lot of you are people who will be only interacting with Snomed City rather than designing. This is just to tell you what you can expect of the design. So if you have not been delivered the right thing, you know that it's not been designed properly by your local team. What are the user interfaces that doctors will be using? And I've heard that, oh, Snomed City is so complex, how will doctors use it? The analogy I use is think of a bicycle and think of a jet airliner. A bicycle is more complex to use. The user has to learn how to ride. It's not something you can do on day one, but it's also very easy to make. Snomed City is like a jetliner. It's hugely complex to manufacture, but then what is the experience of the passenger? He just sits and watches TV and has something to eat and drink, and that's it. He reaches his destination. For doctors, Snomed City is like that. Snomed City does not show any of its complexities to the doctors. It should not if it is properly designed. And the third thing I'm going to tell you about is data analytics for Snomed City. Snomed City is extremely powerful data analytics. So essentially, I'm going to be talking of 2 systems that talk to each other. One is the hospital's EMR on the left. I've drawn it as a server, but it can be just a software sitting on the very same physical server, and a Snomed City server which talks. And the Snomed City server contains all the Snomed City content. They talk to each other. So the example I'm using over here is patient Ramlal, age 56, admitted with the diagnosis of what? So there is a drop-down box. You type in HERNI and you get a drop-down list of matching terms. The Snomed City server supplies the matching terms because all the terms are in Snomed City. And the content which is specific to the patient, his name, his age, and the fact that the diagnosis was the admitting diagnosis and not the final diagnosis, that's nothing to do with Snomed City. Snomed City is not concerned with that. That's part of your hospital's EMR. So you will find, if you read about Snomed City, the literature and all that, you will find record services and terminology services. And it's a bit confusing to see what is meant by record services. Record services is essentially your hospital's EMR, terminology services services is what Snomed CT gives. And if you go into the depths, you'll find that there is a very nebulous distinction between the two. Sometimes record services can do something that Snomed CT services are supposed to do, and vice versa. So question is, how do we incorporate or how do we link Snomed CT into the record services? So many possible solutions. That's the beauty of Snomed CT. You can start with just the basics and you can go up to full implementation in a period of 1 year, 10 years. It doesn't matter, really scalable. But so essentially it depends upon what you want to do with Snomed CT and the benefits one chooses to achieve. Also, whether you are modifying an existing system or whether you are building from scratch. So obviously if you're building from scratch, you're going to have a more powerful system. So let's look at the simplest solution first, and the solution I'm going to show is I'm going to incorporate Snomed CT into the drop-down list of diagnosis. So doctors select a diagnosis, and most EMR situations, doctors have been asked to please give us a list of all possible diagnoses. They go to some place and they produce a list which is not necessarily complete. And if you're using ICD-10, doctors hate ICD-10 because the wordings are designed for statistical purposes. They're not clinical terms. They don't like it. So truly there is no 100% complete drop-down list. Enter Snomed CT provides that answer to everything that doctors want. So the important thing is, if you're going to drop down a list of all the diagnoses, Snomed CT has over 1 lakh terms, more than that, 1.8 lakh terms. You cannot show the whole thing. So if I'm searching for hernia, it's okay as a diagnosis to show hernia and inguinal hernia, but it's not okay in the drop-down list of diagnosis to show things like repair of hernia, which is a procedure, or a hernia belt, which is a material, which is something that the patient wears around to prevent the hernia from coming out. So we need to constrain the list. We need to bring it down to just the diagnosis, or if you're going to have procedures, just the procedures. If it's in the materials department, just the materials that are related to hernias. So how do we do that? So technically there are two solutions. One is something called constraining by hierarchy, which I'm going to explain, and other is by manually picking the list. Okay, this is okay, this is okay, this is not okay. It's a huge task if you're going through many lakhs of records. So the easier thing to do is constrained by hierarchy, but ideally is you actually use a combination of both. So constraining by hierarchy uses this concept of parents and ancestors, and below that you have your children and descendants. So this Snomed CT, unfortunately I cannot give you the introduction, but Snomed CT is linked in a hierarchical relationships to multiple parents, multiple children. We don't have that in humans, but yes, in Snomed CT you can have. So suppose if I look at a list that a foot surgeon wants, he says I only do surgery on the foot. My drop-down list should only have foot procedures. And you locate the concept which says operations on the foot, and all the descendants of that will be these operations of the foot. They're all sort of linked together. So as you go down, it becomes more granular. And if you read the bottommost one, tenotomy of abductor hallucis muscle, a very specific operation. So there is increasing granularity as you go down, and there is a constrained hierarchy. And you have different hierarchies yielding different results. We have one for diagnosis, clinical findings. We have one for procedures. We have one for body anatomy. So if I want to populate a list, okay, abscess drainage, which part of the body? Well, there is a drop down for that. That comes from Snomed CT. Drugs, every possible medicine is that. There are some limitations. The brands are not in that, but the hierarchy is fantastic for pharmaceuticals. Much better than you can get with flat file tables. Now, once you have got a hierarchy, once you have made your list, then you can pick from that and say, okay, let's exclude this, because you can fine tune it and you can make multiple lists. So that is the other alternative method is hierarchy, the other is by reference set. That's about getting your data right. Data entry and storage. Now this comes to what the user sees. So we have a Snomed CT terminology server, and at design time, so you have constrained it's going to give you only the diagnosis. You have dropped down, you have selected a diagnosis, and you're ultimately storing the diagnosis under the diagnosis part of the EMR. Now yes, you have chosen hernia. Hernia has a specific Snomed CT concept ID. So hernia has a concept ID of this. Concept IDs in Snomed CT are near random numbers. Unlike ICD-10, which follow a hierarchy, these are near random numbers. Diagnosis field also has a concept ID. So the whole sentence actually is that diagnosis is hernia. If I just store the information hernia as a Snomed concept ID without storing what exactly it is, we don't know what it means. Is it the patient's past history? Is it that the father has a hernia? Or is it that he does not have a hernia, on examination does not have a hernia? So the whole sentence, Snomed CT actually incorporates the complete sentence in codes. So yes, there is a diagnosis, and yes, there is a hernia, and we will see later on that actually even the diagnosis are 45 type of diagnosis: admitted diagnosis, provisional diagnosis, and so on. So there are basically two types of linkages called terminology bindings. So here in this example, I've got a fracture. I want to store the type of fracture, the location, and the laterality. These are all drop-down lists. I'm getting their information from within Snomed CT. But when I'm storing it, I'm also mentioning what am I storing it against. What is the morphology is this. The finding site is this. Tibia, femur, humerus, whatever it is. So I'm saying fracture of what? Or comminuted fracture of what? Compound fracture of what? Similarly, laterality. When I'm saying right, I'm saying this is the side. So that is basically the storage, how a sentence is constructed, and the whole sentence is to be stored. Otherwise, you may be able to store it locally, but when you transfer it to some other system, or you're communicating with another hospital system or abroad, you're not sending the full sentence. If I just say hernia, I don't even know what exactly I'm talking about. So if you're going to modify current EMRs, that's the most basic. So currently, if you look in your EMR's design, you will probably find something like this, that the programmer has put his own field names. So for name, he has used the word NAME, but for next of kin, he has used the field label as NOK. So if someone says, please print me a sticker which includes the next of kin, he will look at the field NOK. But NOK is not a standardized field everywhere. So there are standard field names. Field names in Snomed CT, as you can see over here. The question is, how do you modify your existing system to remove the field names? So you need to design a storage structure. And there are two possible ways. An easier way, which is while using not that good and a bit difficult to do, but while using it becomes easier. So one is called normalized terminology binding. Essentially, I'll be showing you diagrams. So there you're actually storing your maps between your current codes and the Snomed CT codes in an external table. And the other is denormalize, where you are modifying your code structure and you're actually storing your Snomed CT codes within the code structure. So let's look at normalized terminology binding. So this is probably what you have in your existing EMR. You make an external table and you attach the Snomed CT code. So every time you're going to search for BP systolic, you essentially look for this code, which is in red, and it will take you to all the tables that exist in your EMR, and you can extract. So you can get patient's data across the enterprise. And the designer only has to just put in the codes and in an external table. But if you can change the design, it is better to increase one field in your code structure and store the Snomed CT, because your analysis and data extraction is much faster. So if you look at the user interface, that's what the doctors are going to see. So how are Snomed CT searches better? They're going to find, if you implement Snomed CT over a weekend, on Monday, what is the most complex thing they will notice on Snomed CT? Nothing really. They'll just find that their drop-down lists have become more complete, their spellings are better, all the wrong spellings have gone, and every term is clinically friendly term rather than statistically billing friendly term. That's the only change they will see. They do not get exposed to the complexities of Snomed CT. So doctors love Snomed CT. And correctly spelled, every clinical term is used, possibility of a search success is very high, and you can use even synonyms, and you can use abbreviations, etc., whatever you want. They have something called word phrase replacement. So and it is designed in a well-designed system. Doctors are never exposed. So look at the searching best practices anywhere, not just Snomed CT. Search should always be case insensitive. You can use the words in any sequence, you will still get it. Allow synonyms to be searched. And when there are several synonyms, you use the shortest one. Most important takeaway from this design thing would be that you have to make sure that your synonyms, whatever results are there, are first shown shortest and then longer and longer, because your hit rate increases. So if you're searching for jaundice, you have jaundice and jaundiced as two possible matches. Show jaundice first, right? So I'll skip these things. So other best practices is display shortest terms. In India, you can use US and UK. So do not apply your UK language pack or your US language pack to filter it out. Show all, because you have got doctors trained in US and UK and India. So this is an example I've shown of how the display should be in like a pyramid. And if you can, I have not explained what is preferred and what is acceptable. You show S and P if you can, really. Stripping a term to increase search results. I'll just take 2 minutes more. So this user searches for emergency repair of left inguinal hernia. You don't find it because it only has a code for repair of inguinal hernia. So you strip off things like left, right, emergency routine, etc. And then the term that the user has searched for after stripping becomes repair of inguinal hernia, which he has anyway. But then how do you store the other information? The other information, you can have extra drop-down boxes. So that's where I said there is a watershed between EMR and your record services, terminology services is very vague. So you can move over information from the diagnosis type into the EMR. So I'm having a separate field for file, site, separate for situation. Word equivalents, something really, really good. So kidney stone as a synonym of renal calculus. However, if I'm searching for percutaneous nephrostomy for fragmentation of kidney stone, it is there, but a similar wording with renal calculus is not there. So what happens? If he searches for kidney stone, the whole sentence, success, but search for renal stone, it's a failure. There is something called a word equivalent table released with Snomed CT. Fantastic idea. So we use that. So it's like this. So on the left, you can see whatever matches, whatever has the same code, will have equivalent terms. So you pick up renal calculus from there and search for kidney stone, and you will find it. So it's a sort of dictionary that has come along with Snomed CT. But because Snomed CT actually is able to construct sentences, it's also able to understand sentences. And this is the power of it. You can actually take EMR, which has been recorded, and run engines. There are commercially available engines which you can run on it, and Snomed CT will do the entire coding for you. So you do not have to ask doctors to code. You just ask them to type. And if you're going to have some dragon dictation system, they talk. Behind the scenes, Snomed CT is coding, and that's the power of Snomed CT. The commercial options I mentioned for natural language processing, there are many available. Yesterday I came to know there is another one, I'm forgetting the name, which is free of cost. I have yet to explore it, but these are commercial ones.